All right. Well, thank you for taking your time out to join us today. I am Pete Pizzatello. I work for Vetro and run the marketing team. Ashley, you want to introduce yourself real quick?
Hey everyone, Ashley Poling, COS Systems. I'm business development here in North America.
Uh, so before we dig into it, a couple logistical notes there. This will be recorded, and that the recording and the slides will be shared. We have a couple poll questions to that we'll inject throughout, so we hope that your participation always makes it a more robust conversation. So please feel free to to answer the polls. Also, if you have any questions throughout, you can go ahead and use the chat function to submit your questions, and we'll get through them as we go. Anything that we don't get to, we can respond through email. So I think that's it. So, all right, Ashley, I guess the big elephant in the room, right, is what do sales and marketing people know about workflows, right? So it's typically an engineering problem, data and system integrations, that type of thing. And we've been working with you guys and some of our other partners to talk about a better ecosystem, right? And you and I spent a lot of time speaking with operators on the business sales side and sales side, and that's where these problems manifest, right? So we have kind of put together this series of discussions starting from the business side down to more technical details coming in a few months in the first quarter next year. So,
Yeah, I think
um,
it's just a topic that COS has been passionate about for a long time, and it's really exciting to have our partners really lean in here on this data integrity.
yeah, so be gentle, right? I mean, not asking us deep technical questions, but more what we're hearing and what we're seeing working. And that's what we plan to share with you guys today. So, um, we've been in software. You and I have been in software for a long time, and we know it comes down to data, right? And so, what I see within our customer base is a lot of functionally built systems over decades, right?
Yeah.
And the digital transformation has always been kind of like a buzzword, but it's something that I think people are starting to get their arms around, right? So fundamentally, what we see is the siloed systems that have different definitions of data, which lead to a lot of working in the background for folks to kind of write scripts or bespoke integrations to try to pull all that stuff together, or dump everything into
Data link.
a data lake or Snowflake. What are you guys seeing and talking to your customers about getting ready to adopt a system like you guys provide?
Yeah, I think, you're correct. At COS, we see us as this core centerpiece of data, right? And we think it's really important that your integrations are thorough, that, when you're bringing your pieces in, you probably have a mess. What does your data look like? If you've been deploying, for already 10 years, you might have one system, but that system has 16 layers of data. And, I've even, sold to companies that even though they have one sort of telco in a box product, they're often still using paper and pen to get around it. And then they're
Mm.
having, sort of weekly check-in meetings to cross-reference the data that's available. So I think that there is still a lot of work industry-wide to be done on this issue. And as we move towards more, API-based telco products and software, hopefully we're getting to the point where we have these great integrations like COS and Vetro does, that the truths kind of match, right? That's the goal long term in the industry, right? And I think like you said, I feel a movement towards there, but I think that we're still far behind as far as an industry goes.
Yeah, I agree. I think, as you mentioned, there's kind of this balance between flexibility where people have these individual systems that were bespoke homegrown systems where they can do whatever they want with what you mentioned, these telco in the box platforms, which are much more rigid, right? And so is it either or, right? And I think what we're finding is that there's probably a better cooperative way for systems to work in a best of suite approach. It's just getting people on the same page, right? So data definitions and standards. And the point of this slide is to say that fundamentally your workflows and ultimately how you serve your customers and your network are impacted by these fundamental disconnects back in the system level, right? So I don't think it's a big surprise for people, but it's really trying to connect the dot between the conversations that we have are more on the right-hand side with our customers, right? We talk about how do they grow, how do they service people, outage management, but it's all kind of the symptom of, hey, your systems are just not working well together, right?
Yeah, I think we're in a part where people are starting to think about scalability, right? There's more fiber been built than ever before. There's, hybrid networks now. And we're thinking, something that worked for us at 5 to 15,000 to 30,000 subscribers is just not going to work for us as we reach that 100,000 to 200,000 subscriber threshold.
Yeah. If we can pop up our first poll, if you guys can take a second to complete that, it's really just trying to gauge the scope of the problem, right? So, trying to understand how big your ecosystem is do you have one or two systems or multiple systems? It depends on the size of the company. We've seen people with multiple BSSs, OSSs, but it'd be interesting to see what comes back from the results. While that's getting completed, how big is this problem, right? So, it runs the gamut, right? And I think that's part of what working with you all, with our shared customers and some of our other partners, it's from the planning to the execution to the monetization piece that all of this impacts. And this slide is basically a high level slide to talk through some of the questions that are challenged because of the data issues that we're talking about. Um, what we're trying to show is, in the planning is, if you don't know where to build next, if you don't know where your existing network is or any kind of the demographics around it, I mean, that's an obvious one, right? But, how are you talking to your customers about the impact of the workflow over their life cycle?
One of the things that I think differentiates us greatly, and I think it's why the Vetro integration we have was maybe one of the first BSS OSS ones and made the most sense, is we're an address-driven system, right? We see a lot of the products on the market still coming from a customer profile, based product. And it just kind of again, as you scale, it breeds a lot of inconsistencies and it breeds a lot of concern over like exactly where is, we talked about the as-built problem yesterday, right? It's, where is the customer attached? Did they move? Did they churn? Like, and being that address-based system, really, I think is a great start for this workflow integration that we have at COS and Vetro. And it kind of takes a lot of questions out of that data and that integrity of that data.
Yeah, I mean, so I think a lot of people are shaking their heads. Yeah, yeah, I get that this is a disconnect, but how big is the problem, right? I mean, and so that's part of, as I can try to use the slides. There we go. The things that I think are interesting, we've always talked about with our customers about reducing OpEx, right? Or and profitability. And those things it's interesting, right? We work in a community that's very hardware driven, very physical driven. And I feel like software has been kind of secondary thought because of just the nature of how this industry has grown. But I don't know that you can get to operational excellence or to agility and profitability if you don't start tackling the systems that are driving the equipment and the network that you're trying to build.
No, I don't think we can get to this point of, fiber everywhere or a highly acceptable broadband to every, you know, place in America if we don't start looking at the operational efficiencies of our ISPs. And I think that's the reality, right? We're also in a time frame of consolidation,
Yeah.
right? We're going to see, a TAM of 2200, melt down significantly. And as we do that, now you're going to have, not just, hey, I had a homegrown system. I bought, six other ISPs and they had a homegrown system and they had an outdated system and they had a modern system. And now I've got to figure out how to merge all of this. And now I've scaled from like again, 30,000 to 150,000 subscribers with, data disconnected systems. And so the reality is the time in the market now to kind of come up with these, best in suite products and best in suite solutions is now.
Yeah, I want to come back to that point. The poll results just popped up if you can see them. So it sounds like the majority of the folks on here have between 3 and 5 systems. so the question was, how many distinct software tools does your team use to manage the lifecycle from planning to activation? So anywhere from 3 to 5. Some up there at the greater than 6, about 20% of the audience is greater than 20%. And then spreadsheets, it comes back again, right? I mean, so we have a range of maturity in terms of systems and size of companies. But to your point, I'm just going to close this real quick. Consolidation is a great example, right? I mean, we work with customers that are consolidating multiple vendors, operators into one, and it always comes down to the data, aligning the data, and rewiring these workflows, right? And so I think when we go back to these bespoke homegrown integration approach or a telco in the box, in the middle is really kind of a cooperative understanding, kind of, I guess, standardization of workflows and data so that they're easier to plug and play, right? Which is something that everybody wants to talk about is like quickly time to value. Well, if you have to rewrite all these integrations, you're just pushing your payback period and your time to value. Instead, if we can find an ecosystem that's starting to cooperate a lot better, then we can step in and help these people make these realizations much sooner. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I mean, COS has built a product now called our wholesale engine, and we think that that's the whole thing is, it's going to take a long time for these consolidations to merge and to really look and identify every piece of that tech stack. But what you really need as you start merging these companies is at least this one source of truth. And I think in an interconnected, you know, all of these products with these basic workflows, right? So you have the basic data from, as built to turn on to bill to provisioning to billing. If you can get that centralized and that data centralized, then you can kind of work around it to get the rest of them on board. But if you don't have that core central data in one spot, it's going to be a very messy, very complicated merger. And
Yeah.
you're going to lose a lot of your ROI, you're going to lose a lot of your customers, and that brand loyalty is going to walk out the door.
Yeah, I recently talked to a large operator who runs service assurance, right? And she is in a position where I think they went through 50 acquisitions over some period, some insane amount. They're a big company.
Mhm.
And the due diligence, when that happened, when there's a breakdown of the due diligence, right? Your service assurance team is the one that's worried about is having to fix all these problems, right? So whether you attack the problem on the front end or the back end, the question is the customer going to be exposed to those deficiencies, or are you going to be proactively seeking ways to work around those things, right?
Yeah, the least amount of disruption on the customer side, right? That's
Yeah.
product for. Yeah, exactly.
But the third column is really where I think is most interesting, right? Because we've been talking about OpEx and margin for years, right? Now AI is on everybody's lips. And, there's a couple studies from McKinsey talking about AI, and it comes down to data, right? I mean, that last data point, it's like 50% of these things are going to be stopped because the data's not ready. What are the conversations that you guys are having with your customers about AI?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, right, like today it's a bit of a buzz and a bit of a like future, right? Some companies are using it, but we're not seeing it like in huge scale today. But I think you're right. It's about, preparing for this. And you and I talked yesterday about the reality of AI agents, and they can only be as, they can only be as successful as you give them the information, right? It's like
Hmm.
if you're going to start thinking about the future of scaling AI agents, you've got to have a platform that gives them the proper data. Otherwise, you're just sinking, money and time into something that's going to cause even more of a problem than you started with. It's similar to, a lot of people now realizing that ChatGPT doesn't give you the exact right answer every time.
Yeah.
You need to double check it. It can only give you an answer based on the data and that it has. And I think
Yeah.
we start, I think I truly believe it's going to be a slow ramp at first, but then it'll, speed up quickly with the AI agents. And I don't think we're prepared for them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Going back to your point about the acquisition, like each of these things are pillars in establishing enterprise value for operators, whether you're acquiring a company or planning to be acquired, right? And so I do think what we're seeing is what I'm seeing is folks going out and reaching out and establishing CIOs and CTOs that are outside the telco industry, bringing them in to kind of tackle this transformation once and for all. Because it's not just you're never going to get there. There's a competitive advantage that's waiting to be taken, right? I mean, so you may be in a good position, but you can be easily disrupted by different operators that are way more progressive on the transformational or the
Yeah.
AI side of things, you know.
What's your thought about, these folks coming in from outside of the industry? Are you seeing great? I mean, I'm gonna ask you a question now to Pete. Are you seeing that, produce the results where they're able to get in and understand, or is it sort of slowing the process?
Well, I think you have to plan slow to run fast in some ways, and I do think the CIOs that I've been talking to are coming in with the basic block and tackling, right? It's
Hmm.
enterprise architecture. There's a data strategy. You're starting to rationalize systems because there's a lot of redundancies, but also managing the change to get there, right? And so I think they may not have the domain expertise about all the system pieces and parts, but hosting the important conversations with the stakeholders within there and their partners to say, listen, no, we had an international customer. They went from the consolidated four operators down to one. I think they went from 1,100 vendors to 70, right? I mean,
Wow.
so that's big scale, right? I mean, but think about the
That's insane.
simplicity of that, right?
Yeah.
That kind of simplicity. That's the kind of things, and that's a lot of hard conversations to have. So I think in this industry, some fresh blood in some ways, I think would be a good thing to try to kind of break through that mold, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. Good point.
So you mentioned earlier the single, one of our other slides on the single source of truth, right? So I wanted to just unpack the difference between when we say single source of truth and a system of record.
Yeah.
Um, you
Okay.
know, I'll let you guys talk about the first two pillars, and then I'll add the third one in there. So the operational truth, you know.
Oh yeah, sorry. Um, yeah, no, I think you're right. Like we consider ourselves the business side of the truth. I don't know why sorry about that. Um, we are the business side, the operational side of the truth. And I think when we talk about this whole source of record, source of truth, it's like you need to have your source of truth match, Vetro's source of truth, right? Like we are the business side, you guys are the outside plant side and the address data side. And it's about the integration being seamless so that when something changes in ours, it changes in yours and vice versa, so that we're
Yeah.
not going back and forth and saying, well, yeah, I have this, system of record here or source of truth here, whatever you want to call it. It's like, what's the continuity in it so that I'm not going back and forth and having to double check and back, between the systems constantly and measure that and waste my time and then be confused on, where's the reality in this
Yeah.
problem or in this client or this customer.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think, we talked about the legacy of telco being built functionally, right? And I think BSS systems were traditionally built as a finance mechanism to support billing,
Mhm.
essentially, right? I mean,
Yeah.
customers and products, you're basically just doing service rating to figure out how much you could charge people, right? And I think over time, what people have realized to get a single source of truth is you need to pull in the physical and other attributes to complete that story. And I do think so. That's part of the great marriage that our, to be honest, our customers have kind of pulled us into this whole situation where it's like, hey, I need the business side to talk about the network side, right? And it's the combination of those three systems of record to get to that source of truth so that you have both the business and the network side on the operational side of what's going on. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, no, we were, comparing it to maps, right? Like when Google Maps and Apple Maps came out. And I was laughing when we were talking about this internally because I said that was like going to be the source of divorce in our marriage for like years, Oh, you can't use Google Maps, you can't use Apple Maps. So if you don't have a map that has the accurate data and you can't get to where you're going on time, you're taking wrong turns, you're making extra stops. That's kind of the reality of if you don't have the business side and the operational side and the ground truth interconnected, right? You just can't, you don't know where you're going, right? You're going to make
Yeah.
stops, you're going to be turned around, you're going to be lost for a while. Um, and the other thing that we talk about when we talk about, data integrity is kind of like rule-based structure. You've got to have structure and putting
Hmm.
that data and rules because I think where people lose a lot of time, energy, and revenue is that their systems don't have structure and rules. It's frustrating to have a system that makes you do things a specific way, but the horror stories are that, I can put in an address and I can use ST as street and you can write it as street. And if your system doesn't have some sort of rules and structure around that, and you go from 10,000 entries to 100,000 entries, you've got a massive problem, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's a great example of what we talked about earlier about these homegrown systems and the telco in the box, where the telco in the box is really way more, it's usually a proprietary model and way more structured. And then where there's free flowing, it's a free for all. And so what we're suggesting is kind of the happy medium, right? It's where the ecosystem partners have done the work on your behalf to figure out what the standards are, what the rules are, how those handshakes are, right? And I think that's really the takeaway from this conversation is you guys have a lot going on, operators have a lot going on, selling and supporting their network, taking the IT out of their hands and trusted partners to help them with a scalable, more modern approach to helping them run their business is really what we're starting to see form in these important partnerships. And I do want to touch on the last three things there because it's not just the combination of it. Like you mentioned, there's rules and structure. It's you have to sit down and decide consistency, right? One object, one name, one truth across those systems, right? Those are conversations that not every network operator needs to have. If their partners are having those on their behalf, then I think you start getting these de facto standards developing.
Yeah. Yep.
Um, and just those last 2 points, I think the most important one there is integrity in motion, meaning as the data is flowing through the system, right? You may have partners that have a mobile app and they're punching in bad data
Mhm.
because they're in a rush or they got gloves on, whatever it is. That piece of data can proliferate through a lot of things quickly, right? And so having those checks and balances where the owners of each of these systems of record can say yes or no, right? Does a couple things. One, it preserves the integrity. It also has, tracking so you can figure out where that stuff is coming from. But you also can then go training opportunities with the customers or the systems that are potentially polluting your systems of record, you know. Um, but let's make this a little bit more tangible, right? So that was kind of theoretical at top, right? So this is a little squiggly workflow that talks about demand-driven planning. And we're using our systems as kind of the basis of this, but this is true for any workflow, whether it's Excel spreadsheets or homegrown systems or any other third-party systems, right? So um, what we're talking about here is an example, a use case, right? We have two use cases to talk through. Somebody comes to the website, potential prospect, and they want to know if they have fiber in their neighborhood or their address, right? And so how do you guys handle that request?
Yeah, so we have an e-commerce based platform. So you come in, you put your name on the website, and it's a standardized search. You click your address, you're able to see, what services are available. You're able to segment those services so that if, you're in deployment or if it needs a drop, different options come available in your in your buy flow based on that address and the availability of service at that address. We're verifying that serviceability based on our interconnect with Vetro, right? So I as a system hold the buy flow, and you as a system hold, the reality of my ability to provide service today, tomorrow, or what do my techs need to do in order to get that person service.
Yeah, just real quick, one of the questions that popped up is, where does the address live? Who owns that moving forward?
Yeah, the address Genius is part of Business Engine, but we generally the workflow comes from Vetro.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, and that's a great example, right? I mean, just the address itself. There's many ways, as you mentioned, you
Yeah.
can write addresses, but there's postal addresses, there's other kinds of addresses out there, right? So,
We have a Google address availability in our system, but when folks use Vetro, the reality is the majority of them are putting their addresses through Vetro because, that's where they're storing their outside plant data.
right. Anything else to talk through on this?
Um, yeah, I mean, I think the technician piece and
Mm.
that field service piece is also very integrated, and it's very important to create the automations there as well. I was just on site with a client of both of ours about a week ago, and their technicians are using a combination of COS for their installation process, but they're checking on the as-built in Vetro and like having that ability to integrate the two on the technician side, not just for scheduling and for understanding what needs to be built, but for, that in the field piece is really critical. We've got to get to a point in the industry where our field techs are armed with good information when they go out to do this work and they're good processes so that, like you said, the ball isn't dropped because it's too difficult to put in the information or the processes and then they don't do it and they come back to the truck 4 hours later and they're dumping as much data as they remember. So I think that's the next piece of this data and integration is that field service technician piece.
Yeah, and that's a great point. And what I want to point out, what we're not showing here is on each one of those arrows, one of those handoffs are opportunities for loss, right? I mean, so order fallout happens all the time for bad address or somebody picked the wrong product service catalog or whatever, 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 right? And so I think that's what is implied here is if we can agree on the rules, the data structure, and the workflow, right? You're just mitigating all the potentials for bad things to happen, right?
I think what I see in reality is that way more telcos than we'd like to admit on the first end of this are still picking up the phone.
Yeah.
It's a submit. Now I've got a CSR who's got to go in, they've got to check, their mapping system or their database, whatever that is, an Excel sheet to see if that address is even serviceable. I probably got to double check with 6 people to make sure that there really is some reality there. Maybe I even have to do a truck roll before I'm calling that customer to ask them what kind of service they want to sign up for. And if you think about the amount of folks in this day and age, in this fast-paced world that we live in, that are going to drop off as a customer in that complicated process, I think that is the piece that's still incredibly valuable because we talk a lot, we have our customers are all using this, they've been using this for a long time, but I would beg to say maybe half the industry is still not.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. There's a lot of opportunity for improvement. So I think let's look at another case. And if we can pop up the next poll question as well, just to give us some time to answer it while we're talking through the slide, that would be helpful. Um, There you go. So the next poll question, which we'll talk about in the next slide, is, which operational bottlenecks cost your organization the most time and money right now? So you can select those and we'll talk through the responses in a minute. Let me just close that. So we talked about the design, the planning side of things, the front end side. But there's also the activation side, right? I mean, to talk about consumer expectations and um, opportunity for failure, you
Mhm.
know, the running joke is, yes, we'll be there somewhere between Wednesday and Friday. So stick around type of thing. But
We
uh,
should bring back cable guy jokes, actually. But like we relabel him as the fiber guy. No, I'm kidding.
that could be the sequel. Yeah. So I don't know. You want to walk us through the design activation flow real quick?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, sorry, honestly, I might need you to do it, Pete. I
The
left
glasses.
glasses today and I
I
cannot.
just realized that when I asked you that. I apologize.
I'm just
Yeah.
hanging on by a thread here, not able to read anything on that screen. So, look, I think your points are good. You need real-time visibility into your network elements, right? So that you can actually get this workflow, this smooth, onboarding workflow where you're right. Clients are losing a lot of potential customers because there are too many opportunities for breaks. And if you don't have, the correct integration, if you don't have the correct data and workflow, then you're just constantly dropping potential clients. And I think that a lot of folks have no idea how many they're losing
Yeah.
because of this broken workflow. But yeah, if you want to walk through it, Pete, go.
Yeah. Yeah, I like this graphic, but in some ways oversimplifies what's happening, right? I mean, if you just take through all the data that a technician needs just to do an install in terms of understanding what equipment's there, what needs to be brought, right? Then there's the work orders coming from a BSS or a project management system, right, to telling them where to do that work. And once it's complete, then they have to update all the asset inventories and sign off on the work order flows, right? So there's a lot of data coming in from this left-hand side. I don't know if you can see that from here into that install workflow. So that's part of what we're talking about, that relationship of, okay, this is the data, this is the workflow. It's coming from X, Y, and Z. We've already figured all that stuff out. All the way through this process down to provisioning, service activation. So having your network engineers like getting all that information and keeping all that information, not as just a simple work order flow, but also updating your network asset inventory, as well as getting your customer the service that they've asked for, right? There's a lot of pieces and parts here that both our systems integrate with already that try to pull that together to accelerate this flow, right? So that's really what this is designed to talk about. And we could, there's many, many more of these that we talk through. I know you guys spend a lot of time on your deployments, walking through all the business and operational flows. But this is just to kind of make it a little bit more tangible what we're talking about. Um, Okay, so the poll's back. So again, the question was, which operational bottlenecks cost your organization the most time and money right now? The number one answer is manual data entry between systems, right?
Yeah.
Um, which is interesting, right? So it's exactly what we're talking about. It's the fat finger data transfer type of thing. Half the audience, you're not alone. Um, as build updates is another example. So this would be a good example or another workflow that we didn't show, like in the build out stage. How are we capturing that information? But so it's pretty telling, but
Yeah.
not really surprising. I don't know if you're surprised by any of those.
No, I'm not. I think it confirms what we're oversimplifying here, right? It's like you are building systems on top of systems and you're creating opportunities for folks to just kind of put in anything. And then there is no reality and it's just a complicated reality at that point. And you're spending a lot of time trying to chase the truth instead of it just simply flowing through. And that's the goal, right? The goal between the Vetro and the COS integration is a smooth workflow so that you're taking a lot of the guesswork out of this install. Um, eh, you know,
Yeah, I mean the shocking thing about half the people doing manual data uh, input is interesting because again we talked about there's all this opportunity for mistakes, but that's a good one, right? I mean, just putting the wrong information. But I just what strikes me is just the time, how fast you can move when you have to go. We have customers telling us that their outside plant people are dropping things into a Dropbox and they have to go pull that information, update the records. Then there's this cycle time back and forth between the inside plant, outside plant to make sure it's all correct before they can even invoice, right? I mean, so that's just time to money kind of things
yeah,
that are just simple stuff. And in this market, uh, the way things are, I just don't think we can afford to be that inefficient moving forward. Otherwise, you're vulnerable.
yeah, extremely. I think the other one is, your maps aren't updated. I think that's another great piece of our integration is that, what's true in Vetro is on a map in COS, and I can go click and check on that truth. So again, it's that not just the information on the data in the back end, it's visual for our customers. And I think that really makes it extremely beneficial.
Yeah, and I think the what I've heard about that experience is it's getting rid of the swivel chair, right? So it's taking different data and combining those different essentially systems of record into a unique view that solves a problem faster and better, right? And I think that's really what people are pleading for. And this day and age, there's no reason that we can't get there, right? In between the data and all the technology that we have. So. This is kind of gratuitous slide, all the good stuff that we've already talked about. As we talk about future episodes of this series, we'll talk about more the how, but again, just trying to hammer home that now is the time. between the consolidation that's happening, between the pressure that people are getting to serve their communities, if there's BEAD funding coming, that's another consideration of being able to spend that quickly. And then the AI monster is coming, right? I mean, so I'm really interested to see how 2026 plays out in terms of how people respond to this. We're seeing a lot of folks doing some amazing things, and hopefully we can get them to share the stories moving downstream.
Yeah, I just had a chat yesterday with our CEO just about trends that we see in 2026. And I think we've touched on a lot of them, but one thing I don't think we've touched about on is the reality that we've been focused really much on like a passings model, right? We've been in a
Hmm.
build phase, like how many passings, how many passings. And now the reality is like, how many customers do you have?
Yeah.
And we're in a take rate conversation now, and you are not going to get to those numbers if you don't have operational efficiencies.
Yes, monetization is paramount these days. Um, all right, so we talked about a lot of things, right? We talked about the current state of messy stuff. We scared everybody, saying they're going to lose their business if they don't get their act together. But let's leave some folks with a little bit of
They
hope.
don't buy Vetro and COS,
Yeah,
right?
right.
Okay, that's our job, right?
So, but there are some things that people can start thinking about, right? So here's just a quick best practices top 10 list, high level, to help people talk about some of the things. So really what we're talking about is that number one thing, right? It's really talking about how do the systems that you're adopting as part of your ecosystem, how do they work well together, right? And are you responsible for negotiating that, or are you expecting your partners, your product vendors to come to the table with a much more collaborative decision, you know,
Yeah.
is so, um, you know, along those, what's happening in the background is same or the bullet points that follow, I think, right? We have a lot of conversations about who owns what data, how do we hand it off to you guys, right? I mean, so I think what we're trying to do is show you how the sausage is made a little bit, that you guys can get your head around the work, and picking your partners is critical because hopefully they've had these decisions already, and they should, instead of dumping that on you, because all that's really doing is forcing all these conversations to happen after you set the clock in terms of your deployment timeframes, right?
Yeah. And integration can mean so many different things, but I think you're right. It's, picking partners that, play well together in the sandbox and that, also just really have set the collaboration rules because I do think that customers want to take the guesswork out of a lot of things. They don't want to be directing every single move, every single workflow. They want to know what's worked best at, other clients. And I think if you can and pick your tech stack based on, you know, companies that have already had these conversations and have already set these best practices, you're on a much clearer path to success.
Yeah, and so I'm happy to talk about any of those things with anybody who's interested. Just two resources out I wanted to drop off for folks, and we'll share links to these things, right? I mean, on the left-hand side, McKinsey did a nice report on IT and telecom. I think it came out in February 2025. And it's basically saying that folks that get their IT house in order are outperforming their peers in every other aspect, right? I mean, it seems like a duh kind of thing, but I think hammering home, especially in the telco space with the legacy perspective that we have, there's a lot of interesting findings in there. Hopefully people get a chance to check that out.
Yeah, you just dropped that one on me, so now I have to go read it.
Yeah, it's a good one. I know I get a little McKinsey geeky.
Uh,
And then the other one is a joint paper that we put together, which is a little bit more detailed what we talked about, right? So we'll send access to that for you guys. We hope you take a look at that. The one thing I do want to throw out there, though, is we collaborate with our customers, prospects, anybody about this in general. So whether you want to come in or have us come in and talk about an system audit, or how we're working with the existing customers, I think that is a critical first step. And maybe if it's not us, it's another partner. There's folks out there that do this for a living, digital transformation. It's
yeah,
really a call to action. It's like, hey, it's time to not, you can't ignore this conversation any longer. Whether you want to acquire new systems or be acquired, or whether you want to meet your BEAD goals or serve your community, or if you want to adopt AI, data is the foundation of all those things. Um, let's see.
great summary.
Well, we'll see. Um, we have no questions right now. So I guess thanks for everybody to listening. This is the to wrap this up. We'll be sending out, like I said, a series getting more deeper in there. Ashley, I want to appreciate your time sharing how you're working with your customers and some of the insights that you guys have.
Yeah, thanks, Pete. I really appreciate you having me on today. And then just of course, really appreciate our long-term partnership with Vetro. I think we've been stomping the same grounds for quite a long time and see a lot of the future of the same. So we look forward to having more customers utilize these workflows.
Um, yes, we're looking forward to that. Just another question popped up that we'll answer offline. So just to keep things moving here. So I want to thank our audience for taking your time out today. I know you guys are super busy. It's the end of the year. I'm sure everybody's running around with their hair on fire. Happy to speak to anybody about any of the concepts we talked about. And we look forward to you guys joining our future conversations where we get a little bit more detailed into the engineering side of the problem. So thanks again.
Thanks, Pete. Thanks, everyone.